Elm City, what up? Look, I'm from a city that's half pretty and half gritty. Ain't too many cities rocking with the Elm City, home of the Blazers. Those were the days when I played all these fast breaks. We don't need plays. We play on Sundays like we don't need praise. We pressing our game like we don't need breaks. Look, no debate, best team in the state. We flow like the Lakers back in '88. I learned to play Crazy Eights in the city that raised the kid that wanna be big. Like I wanna be big, big. I really hate the way raps portray.
Good evening. Welcome to Storytellers New Haven. This is our March 2021 edition. I'm Karen Du Bois-Walton, co-founder of Storytellers New Haven, and I am so pleased to have you with us tonight. As you can see, for a moment, I'm solo. I host this each month with my partner, Kevin Walton. Kevin will be joining us shortly. But Kevin and I founded Storytellers New Haven over 3 years ago now, as an opportunity to bring the community together using story as a community building tool. We were both introduced to storytelling through the community leadership program that's offered by Bill Graustein, and really fell in love with story for so many ways. Story as a leadership tool, story as a way of building community. And when we each finished our sessions with CLP, we would come back and think together about how powerful story had been in opportunities to see each other differently, and to move past what can be preconceived notions about each other. So we started putting our heads together and said, let's figure out if there's a way to keep storytelling going. And we have been hosting these. Prior to the pandemic, we were hosted at Concat in the Orchid Cafe. And we thank Eric Clemens and the team at Concat, who's been our host for our in-person sessions. And we do hope, as we move through this health pandemic and more of us are vaccinated and restraints and restrictions start to loosen, that we will be able to be back in that space. But they are open for breakfast and lunch, and please support Concat as a wonderful New Haven treasure located at Forest Science Park, and the students in their culinary program can serve you breakfast or lunch, so stop in. I also want to thank Kevin Ewing and his team at Baobab Tree Studios for the technical support. They pivoted and allowed us to keep doing this, and you can follow tonight's session and also visit our Storytellers channel on YouTube, where you can visit some of our past stories. We are also on Facebook, and you can follow us there, where you'll always get connected around our upcoming events. I am excited tonight. We have two wonderful tellers who have joined us and will be sharing story. As we work with story in Storytellers New Haven, we invite you to sit back, relax, and listen to the story. And as you're listening, think about what you might be curious about and what you'd love to learn more about, because we do have an opportunity for you to use the chat feature on YouTube and put your questions for our teller. Drop them right there in the chat, something that you want to know more about or hear more about, something you think the teller might be able to respond to. And we will go through those questions and pose a few of them after our teller is told. Our format's very simple. The first teller will tell for about a story for about 10 or 15 minutes. At the end of that, we'll see what questions are in our chat. Kevin and I will ask a few questions, we'll engage, and then transition to our second teller. Perhaps you're wondering how to be a teller. It's really simple. All you have to do is reach out to Kevin or I, and we can get you scheduled for one of our upcoming sessions. Again, we meet monthly, and we do have a few sessions we're still filling out between now and June. So please, with that, I think we're ready to go ahead and head into our first story. So I am happy tonight. We have a treat to be able to hear a story from somebody who has sat in our audience, I think almost since the beginning of our Storytellers New Haven experience. I've gotten a chance to know this teller in a number of different community settings, including things that are offered through locally here in New Haven through CEIO, co-creating effective and inclusive organizations, in his leadership work through that organization. So at this point, I would love to welcome David Carter to our virtual stage. Hi, Dave. Yeah, I think you're on mute. There you go. Perfect. Welcome. It is so good to have you here. Absolutely. So welcome to the Storytellers Chair. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Well, this is a story called My Grandmother's House. I grew up in a family where independence, self-reliance, and thrift, specifically Yankee thrift, were unspoken values in all that was expected of us. From my perspective as a child, it was all about making our own way in the world. The larger family of relatives were scattered. We saw some of them on holidays, exchanged gifts and thank you letters, but mostly we felt we were on our own. My parents, older sister, and barely older brother. The stories we heard about our ancestors were sometimes colorful, but didn't carry much weight or seemed to require much attention. This shifted with an unexpected coincidence. In 1980, I finished grad school at the Yale School of Architecture. My wife had a good job in New Haven. We had a great cooperative daycare for our 2-year-old, and so we decided to stay in New Haven. I had just received a small inheritance from my maternal grandmother, so we were in a position to look for a fixer-upper house, a renovation project for my new profession. An independent, self-reliant, thrifty life for our own little family. We looked at many houses, mostly in up-and-coming neighborhoods. This was well before the impact of gentrification was part of my awareness. We settled on a 2-family house on Maple Street, just off Sherman Avenue. We called it Inner Westville. It was a quiet street, and the house just felt right. Affordable, well-built, with historical character, lots of potential for renovation, and income from the first floor apartment. At the real estate closing, the lawyer who was representing us circulated the original deed of the property, dated 1893. The property was part of a new development, the old Almshouse Farm. The deed required that the purchaser build within a year a house costing at least $3,600. Amazing. I noticed the purchaser's name on the original deed, Stephen Benjamin Warren. I wonder what his story. Wait, Stephen Benjamin Warren. That's my great-grandfather. And his daughter, my grandmother, whose legacy enabled the purchase, was born in 1893. My ancestors. And they had lived in the house I was about to buy. Meet Ruth Warren Chalmers, my maternal grandmother. We share a middle name. We always called her Bunny. I don't remember ever hearing the source of that nickname. Sadly, there was no one surviving to ask about that story. My father's parents died when my father was a child, so Bunny and Dada, the family name for my grandfather, were the only grandparents I ever got to know. Christmas, growing up in the 50s in Cambridge, Mass, meant piling in the family station wagon, a maroon DeSoto, succeeded by a 2-tone blue and white Plymouth with tail fins, to embark on a 4+ hour road trip through the Berkshires to Amsterdam, New York, a fading mill town upstate on the Mohawk River, to the house where my mother grew up, or at least where she spent her childhood. All those memories of Bunny's house, cookies baking, stockings hanging from the mantle, the decorated tree with packages piled around. There were slow-paced dinners with many courses and having to practice our best table manners. Our parents, relaxed and being cared for. At the heart of this was Bunny herself, poised, the house warm and inviting, always giving her full attention. She was hard of hearing and used a hearing aid. She was also a skilled lip reader, so she always looked intently at the face of whoever was talking. In her presence, I always felt recognized, welcomed in a graceful world, and taken care of. This showed up in lots of little ways. Care packages would arrive from her when I was away at summer camp. When I was little, she honored my collection of small stuffed monkeys and teddies by knitting them tiny sweaters. When I was in 7th grade, she took me and my mom on a tour of colonial Williamsburg over spring break. On this trip, she nurtured my emerging interest in architecture and encouraged me to ask questions of the tour guides. I wrote my first term paper that year. It was about colonial architecture, and why New England houses of the era had the chimney in the center of the house for heat retention, and Southern houses had chimneys on the outside walls for larger interior spaces. From before we were teenagers, Bunny sent each of us a small allowance check every month, along with a letter about things going on in her life. The book she was reading, issues in the news, birds in her garden. In the early years, I would respond with a brief thank you note or maybe a drawing. Over time, this evolved into more thoughtful responses and a habit of letter writing that endured well into my adult life. The importance and depth of this correspondence was revealed to me this past summer when, in COVID isolation, I decided to clear out our garage. On a high shelf, I discovered a large dust-covered box containing literally every letter Bunny had ever received from members of my family. I reconstructed how this box made its way to my garage in New Haven. Bunny died in 1977, a year before the birth of my daughter. I assume my mother took custody of the box at that time. Then when my mother downsized in 2003, the box must have come to me, unappreciated at the time. I've distributed the letters from others in the collection to their authors, my brother, my late sister's children, and 2 cousins. It was sobering for me to be reminded that we are now the senior generation of this family. In preparing to share this story, I reread the letters I wrote to Bunny in the last decade or so of her life, my years between 18 and 28. I was struck by how freely I wrote of what was going on for me. That sense of being recognized by her and cared for was still with me. I felt comfortable writing Bunny about whatever was going on in my life. There were letters about the anxieties of my first year away from home and at college, about a girlfriend who wasn't working out, about my urban homesteading adventures in Philadelphia before I came to New Haven, about the challenges of a first-year teacher working with emotionally disturbed adolescents, about the anticipation and delight of the first firing of my self-built pottery kiln, my engagement and marriage, my move to New Haven for grad school. I found a few of her letters in my own correspondence box, a cardboard sleeve that housed a Jeroboam of champagne used to celebrate my 21st birthday in 1970. There was a lot of heartache in that box. Bunny's letters were always full of affirmation, appreciation for what I was doing, encouraging me to try new things, not to be hard on myself, to enjoy life. I was stunned when she died, alone, gently, by her own hand. A lonely widow, terrified of losing her health, her independence, her self-reliance. A hidden pillar of my life, no longer there. When 3 years later I happened to live in the house she grew up in, I took an interest in what her life in New Haven might have been like. This is a break from the family pattern. My parents rarely talked about their experiences growing up or their families of origin. We were independent and forward-looking. Here was an ancestor that made me curious about those values of independence and self-reliance. When we first moved in on Maple Street, the house across the street was still occupied by the original family. We introduced ourselves to the old lady who was living there, alone. We told her the story of our discovery. It might have been over a cup of tea, and asked if she remembered my grandmother. "Oh, yes, I remember Ruth and her brother Harold. We weren't any too chummy." An untold story of neighborly detachment. That's all we got. So I asked my mother to fill in the gaps. She related that Bunny's mother had died unexpectedly when she was 13 or 14, and Bunny had taken on responsibilities for running the household. Her father was, with his brother, publishing the Commercial Record, a real estate magazine which flourished as New Haven was expanding rapidly around the turn of the century. In 1906, around the time of her mother's death, the family moved from Maple Street to a house still standing on the corner of Alden and Edgewood Avenues in the heart of Westville. In a scrapbook that must have found its way into a box in my garage along the same route as the box of letters, I found evidence of her prosperous teen years in New Haven. I learned the origin of the phrase, "my dance card is full." In the scrapbook, there were printed dance cards with tiny pencils attached from the social dances she attended. All the lines were full. She was apparently quite popular. There were ticket stubs and programs from shows at the Schubert, memorabilia from her high school years at New Haven's Commercial High School on what is now Tower Parkway. Although a motherless child managing her father's household, she was having fun and preparing to take her place in society. I should briefly introduce my grandfather, Harvey Chalmers II. I should confess that my attitude toward Dada, my grandfather, remains strongly colored by my mother's oblique stories of his physical abuse of her older brother, my Uncle B, and his psychological abuse of Bunny. Dada, well, Harvey at the time, came to Yale in 1912 after 2 years at Williams College. It's hard for me to imagine him then, certainly different from my image of a self-centered, corpulent, and irascible woodsman in his later years. He studied history, Greek, and Latin. The few of his stories I remember hearing were full of pranks and self-important people getting their comeuppance. I know little about their courtship. I suspect Dada was charming and attentive, well-heeled, captain of the varsity fencing team, a good prospect. I made up that Bunny was chafing at her responsibilities as the manager of her widowed father's household and happy to entertain a vision of life beyond New Haven. They were married on my grandfather's 24th birthday, September 11th, 1914, after his graduation in the Yale class of 1914. He had a brief stint in Boston and a turn in the military at the end of World War I. Then he brought Bunny home to Amsterdam, where he joined the successful family business, Harvey Chalmers & Sons, manufacturers of high-fashion pearl buttons to the world. They built the house on Guy Park Avenue where they lived until Bunny's death, and there raised a family. Dada eventually took over running the button business in 1943. He had no love for the daily grind at the mill. His real passions were collecting stories to use in writing and publishing historical novels about the Mohawk Valley, or being in the woods with hunting and fishing companions. Bunny was on her own to tend the children and set about making a life of grace and social standing in the industrial town of Amsterdam and the wider capital region. Her scrapbooks continue to show theater attendance in New York and social events. Most of what I know about her life is from our later correspondence. During my childhood visits, she was busy with all the arrangements for the holidays. She was active in the local historical society and worked on the restoration of historic Fort Johnson in Amsterdam. She had a circle of women friends called the Furnich, based initially on a shared interest in antique furniture. Their shared interest ranged far, and in later years, they traveled to cultural events together and met regularly to discuss books and current events or study the roots of Western civilization. She was a Renaissance woman. She had help in running a thrifty house. When I hung out in the kitchen during our Christmas and occasional summer visits, there were stories and evidence of frugal living during the Great Depression and World War II. What sticks in my mind are the meat grinder clamped to the work table in the kitchen, where she ground her own hamburger meat, tales of ration cards and oleomargarine with orange dye packets to make it look like the butter that was unavailable. She knew how to get the most out of every scrap. No chicken was roasted that didn't later become the base for soup. Leftovers are always artfully presented. While I was observing domestic thrift in Bunny's kitchen, Dada was exercising his own solitary version of thrift in his den. His warm leather armchair across from a black and white console TV. He never missed an episode of Bonanza. A tray table where he would eat dinner when there were no guests. At his feet, the manuscript in progress of his latest book. Each chapter was a stack of salvaged fronts and backs of number 10 envelopes, tiny handwriting on both sides, bound with a fat blue rubber band. I think my mother's protective lens kept me from seeing the depth of this complex man. I embraced the spirit of thrift in my urban homesteading days in Philadelphia, teaching myself to bake bread, making a small frying chicken provide my meals for a week. By Thursday, it was chicken soup with rice. I still make soup from a chicken carcass and have returned to bread baking in the pandemic. Where else is Bunny's legacy today? We left the Maple Street house in 1994. New Haven was hurting at the height of the crack epidemic. After 2 break-ins and an assault on my daughter, we no longer felt safe in inner Westville. It was a different we. I had divorced my wife, and at Christmas of 1986, the man who is now my husband moved in with his son. Both kids had to shift from being only children and learned what it meant to be part of an unusual blended family. We stayed in New Haven. Today, in our home in East Rock, some of Bunny's furniture is mingling with furniture from my husband's grandmother, other mama. About the time we moved to East Rock, there was a new pastor at the UCC church where I had joined the choir while in grad school. A moment. Pastor Lillian Daniel was one of the few people after Bunny who really saw me. She called forth in me a sense of empathy and connection. Among many acts of grace, she introduced me to Pat Spear, the lead organizer for ECHO, Elm City Congregations Organized. I remember the day Pat and I met for lunch at the Star Diner on Lombard Street and had a conversation that changed my life. He simply asked, what was my purpose in the world? That question tapped into something missing in my life, a hunger for connection, a call to service. With ECHO, I dove into leadership training, one-on-ones, getting to know people with life experiences completely different from my own, and eventually going into action together, learning about and practicing power with. For the first time that I can remember, I was showing up as a whole person. This played out dramatically at a Bible study at Lillian's house one sweltering Sunday afternoon in August 1997. In the course of the afternoon, I was moved by the Spirit to come out as a gay man, first to an older man in a one-on-one, and then to the whole group. Now, I grew up completely unchurched, and here I was, being held by the Holy Spirit to share my story and to be embraced by what I was coming to see as my community of faith. My family values of independence and self-reliance were not making sense in the world of community organizing. Righteous thrift seemed hollow in the face of grinding poverty. I began to see others in the way that Bunny had seen me and knew that there was work for me to do. It took a dozen more years and being seen by other remarkable women like Heidi Brooks, Neonu Span, and Sonia Ahuja. I was able to start letting go of my career in architectural project management, of having all the answers, of being in charge. I was called in to take on the challenging relational work of justice and social change. I came to see that my family's values of independence and self-reliance are at heart individualism, a core principle that sustains white supremacy culture. This principle is not compatible with the world I am now called to co-create. New values are emerging. We are all in this together. Belonging is key to a just world. Community is a necessary instrument of healing. Thrift is still with me, and I am working to loosen its grip. It brings with it a scarcity mindset, which also upholds the oppressive assumptions about the inevitability of haves and have-nots. There is enough. We are enough. We have what we need to do what needs to be done together. Bunny's true legacy to me was not a house. It wasn't memories of childhood Christmas. It was connection, recognition, acceptance. Embracing these deeper values is still changing me. It helps me imagine the possibility that if I stay grounded in connection and learning, I may belong and have something to offer to the small and wondrous city that is New Haven. Thank you for listening.
David, thank you for that offering. Oh my goodness, what a beautiful journey. This is one of those, I mean, there are so many stories where I wish we were actually physically in community, because this is one of those kinds of stories that is, to me, just the manifestation of what we hope out of storytellers, a sense of building community and being able to be taken on journeys like the one you've just shared with us. So thank you. Are you up for a few questions?
Sure, bring it on.
Great. And you're getting applause in our chat feature also. That's our virtual form of applause. So I was struck by your research on the property that you were about to buy that led you to this discovery, and just how, I don't know, I guess the universe aligns, right? That you would be on the verge of purchasing this place that had such great family history to you. So as I assume you shared that with others in your family, what was the sort of, what were the memories of the family and what came up then?
Well, everybody said, wow, that's amazing. But as I said, my family didn't talk about their history, so there weren't emerging stories about Bunny's life in New Haven or anything like that. That's the research I had to do. The actual deed was something that the lawyer had gotten from the title company, I guess. So that was just completely gratuitous. I didn't do any research for that.
Absolutely. And so, you know, hearing about Bunny and the gifts that she gave to you, and then knowing you in the way that I know you, which has been through your community work, it was beautiful to sort of hear that journey, because I guess I would have thought that was always how you lived your life. And so this peek into sort of what your life was like prior to your sort of returning to the values of that Bunny had instilled in you was very, very important. What do you think about, because you mentioned that you have children. What do you think how have they traveled with you in that growth, in that transition, and what do you think has been passed on to them?
Oh, great. So my daughter, I think, had some of my wanting to know the right answer and be in charge. And as she was starting her career, we had long talks about the dark side of that. And she did a lot of internal work, and I think is now a very effective leader of a nonprofit organization out in California. And my stepson is, after being a kind of rock and roll wayward child, is now a UCC minister up in Maine. So something was cooking. I have to give my husband credit for some of that, of course.
So Bunny's legacy is living on through you and through the next generation. I
think so.
Yeah.
I hope they're watching. I've invited them to tune in.
Oh, good. And then I have to ask, because you mentioned some amazing women in our community, and for those, I don't know, when people may be watching this, many years down the road, but I do need to know today is International Women's Day as you're telling the story. You've mentioned these amazing women in this New Haven community that we know about. I'm just curious, as you called the names of a few of them, Heidi and Neonu and others. Have you had a chance to share with them how they influenced your story and your journey? And Sonia, I don't want to forget Sonia.
Yeah. Well, what do you say to someone who's mentoring you? Of course, they all helped shape my life, and if I haven't thanked them in ways that they've seen, I thank them here now. It's an amazing privilege to have worked with each of them.
Yeah, so beautiful. Well, thank you so much. I so appreciate you bringing us on this journey, and this is one of those stories also that is deeply rooted in New Haven. And here at Storytellers New Haven, we love to help fill out the story of New Haven. And so this story did that very beautifully. And thank you for sharing it and for being one of our very faithful members of the storyteller community that we've grown. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. All right. Well, look who's here.
Yeah.
The coach has made it. I think, although we weren't able to see you on screen earlier, I think you were able to join and be backstage for a minute. So you may have heard we just had this really beautiful story told by David that brought us through a whole history of a New Haven story that we wouldn't have known had we not invited him to the chair. So glad to see you. All was well in the gym?
Yeah, it was. Then I was having a little trouble getting in, but here I am. So thank you for holding it down as usual.
Always. I think our audience knows by now that I have to share you typically from November till March. I share you with a team full of young men who benefit from your coaching. This season a little different though. When did we get started? Actually, because of the pandemic, January?
Oh man, February. We didn't get started February 19th, I think it was. Yeah,
this is going to be one of the many COVID-related stories of 2020, 2021.
Yeah,
but we pivot and we make it all work.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad that you're here for our second telling though. Before I introduce our second teller though, we've become part of this amazing Connecticut storytelling community. And so we get lots of great information. Usually if we were in person, we would let people stand up and share their announcement and their invitation to others to join in storytelling events. But because we're virtual, I get those sort of emailed to me and I can still make those announcements. So there are a few things I want to just highlight. One is this wonderful jewel in New Haven, the International Festival of Arts and Ideas, is doing a whole storytelling aspect to this summer's festival. And the festival is always such an amazing time in New Haven. And so just want to raise that if anybody is interested in being a storyteller during this year's International Festival, the deadline is coming up very quickly. Applications are closing on March 10th. So you would want to jump on artidea.org to look to sign up. And they're looking for all storytellers that might share their stories in a variety of storytelling events during the festival this summer. Secondly, usually if Arnie Pritchard was in the house, which he probably is virtually, but if he were with us, he would be standing up to remind us about the Institute Library Story Sharing Group. And this month's telling gathering is on March 11th on Zoom at 7 p.m. So if you're interested in the Institute Library Story series, please join them. And you can always reach out to us. We can share that Zoom link as well. So with that, I think, unless you have anything you wanted to say before we bring up our next teller, because we didn't get our usual banter in the morning.
Yeah, no, I think,
the beginning.
Yeah, I think it's time. I don't want to hold up the show.
All right, excellent. So I am excited because, particularly for people who might be on the fence about telling and should they raise their hand and what's it like. I always love when we have return tellers because it really brings home the fact that this is a great experience, such a good experience that people actually want to come back and do it again and again. So I'm also especially thrilled because the last time this particular teller was there, Kev, you hosted her, but I was out, I think I was traveling for work at the time. Remember back when we used to be able to travel?
Yeah.
Around pandemic.
I almost forgot. I was like, when was that? Like,
I know. So I believe I was traveling at that point. And so you got to host Piyar, or Pam Bellerin, for a beautiful story that she shared that also sparked a great conversation in the community, the in-person community afterwards. So it was such a great experience that when we put the call out, she said she would be happy to tell again. So we're going to bring to the virtual stage next Piyar, or Pam Bellerin, who is a New Haven resident in the Hill community, and also a midwife who has caught, I think that's what midwives say, caught many babies. Many helped to provide that support to new parents and welcome little ones into the world. So we're excited to hear what you might share with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I want to say that I am proud to share the stage with David Carter. That was a wonderful, warm story, and it took twists and turns that I was not expecting. It was a pleasure to listen. It was a treat. I also just want to bring up again International Women's Day, because as someone who takes care of women, if I didn't bring that up, it's if you have a mother, a partner, a sister, a daughter, a relative who identifies as a woman, I think it's really important to show them some honor today. And it's not too late. It's still today until midnight. But just let them know that you appreciate them and how the influence that they've had on your lives. I'm very happy that I am a woman. As Maya Angelou said, I must have done something right in a previous life. I'm going to get to my story. It's called The Note. And it is not about women today, but I hope that you'll enjoy it. The year after my mother got married, I started first grade. And after spending the summer, like I spent all of my summers in North Carolina with my grandparents on their farm, I returned to Connecticut to live with the happy couple and start school. I remember my days in the country with fondness. The country is what we call North Carolina. I followed my grandfather around while he fed the animals and did chores, and he taught me how to fish with a bamboo fishing rod. My grandmother, I helped her pick vegetables and ran around barefoot and took baths in a galvanized tub in the front yard with cold water, and I thought it was the best. And I entertained myself playing alone, actually. And this was, for me, as close as you could get to childhood heaven, as close as I could imagine. And I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave the fresh, dewy mornings, the hot as the devil middays, and the balmy evenings, falling asleep to the sound of crickets and bullfrogs. And I wish that I could have just stayed forever in that place. But we grow up and we move on. Early September in Connecticut was uncomfortable by comparison. It didn't help that I would prefer to be in North Carolina, but the weather was similar but a little sharper. So the mornings were cooler and required a sweater or a jacket, but the top of the day, you could get your skin scorched by being in the sun. The sun was too hot, the shade was too cool, sweater on, sweater off. Sounds like a whiny kid, right? So sweaty and uncomfortable in my fall outfit, my new fall outfit for school, it was one of these summer, not fall days that changed my life in the schoolyard. The first grade classroom was decorated, our first grade classroom was decorated with cartoon cutouts. Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, they all embellished the alphabet. I guess that was supposed to make us want to learn it. On the bulletin board. And basic polite phrases like, please, thank you, excuse me, you're welcome. Those were all posted in addition to the name of the queen bee herself, Mrs. Beets, my teacher. Mrs. Beets was a slender, older, pale white woman in her 60s, I guess, and probably looking forward to her retirement from teaching, inner city or Black kids. I have to say poor Black kids from Newhallville, because that's where she was teaching. And that's where I attended school briefly. Her hair was bleach blonde. And I say bleach blonde, not because I knew it was bleach then, but I know at that age, your hair is no longer blonde, if that's what it used to be. So I'm saying that sort of retrospectively. A woman her age couldn't possibly still have blonde hair. And her teeth kind of matched her hair, probably because she was a smoker. I think everybody was a smoker back then. She had lovely manicured red nails, and they matched this bright red lipstick that she used to wear that kind of bled into the wrinkles in her lip. And her lips were always pursed. Today we have a name for that resting face, but I'm not going to go into it. She wore beautiful, stylish dresses. They were bright and colorful, and they were all pretty similar. They had short sleeves or cap sleeves and a snug bodice with a cinched waistline and a belt, a thin belt. And she had matching capizios. And her, if you don't know what capizios are, probably you should ask your grandma or someone. Her skirts were full and pleated, sometimes just flared, and they used to swish when she walked by. And I just thought her manner of presentation was fabulous from the neck down, I have to say. I don't want you to be confused here. If I'm giving you the impression that she was a kind and beautiful for her age kind of teacher, like a warm and fuzzy first grade teacher, no, that's not what happened. She made me anxious, and I didn't care for her. And in secret, I thought that she might be a real witch, like not a fake witch, like a real witch. And I'm going to tell you why I came to think that way. The first day of school, when we met her, she chatted brightly. She smiled when she was introducing herself to us and to our parents who were allowed to come in on the first day. But her folded arms and just her demeanor it sort of betrayed her smile, if you get what I mean. And so as soon as the parents left, the fussing began. She was short on patience and long on what was wrong with our classroom. She complained. She complained about how we sat in our chairs. She complained about how we wiped our noses. She complained about how we ate our snacks. And she complained about how we smiled for no reason, as in, what are you smiling for? Type of question, which kind of leads a kid to believe that she hated us. So I ask you, how does a child process the feeling of wanting to be liked and constantly trying to be on your best behavior, but finding out that you're not doing anything right, like you're being ridiculed? And everyone wants to be liked by their teachers at that age, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, maybe even third, who knows? But if you just can't make it happen, she barely knew us, and she rarely had a kind word or a smile for us. And I think most of us were petrified of her. I tried to figure out what worked in these kind of situations. It's sort of survival, I guess. And it probably stemmed from being raised by many family members in a loving manner, but quickly figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And so, I thought about, at home, if you can do something kind for the person or let them see you do something kind, usually that warms the heart. And if there's a mean streak involved, it kind of narrows the streak for a little while, most of the time. And so I tried to give some thought as to how I could please her. And I decided I knew a trick. I knew how to read. I could read, and I thought I could read for the other students, for my classmates. And so I tried it in the reading corner. In our class, we had a reading corner and a craft corner and all the different little sections, areas. And so in the reading corner was basically just chairs and a table and some books on the shelf on the side. And so I went there with a few kids who were just sort of flipping through books, and I started to read to them. And one day, Mrs. Viets witnessed me reading. And it went kind of like, see Jane run, run Jane run, see Tim run, run Tim run. Blonde Jane and brown-haired Tim frolicked to nowhere in particular. As I shared the pictures, I would flip the book over and share the pictures with my classmates. These books, I have to say, were far easier to read than the still easy books that I read at home with mommy. After work, while she was cooking, I would read aloud to her. Are You My Mother by P.D. Eastman and The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats. Those were some of my favorite books to read. And so as she approached my little reading circle, she said, young lady, what do you think you're doing? And her annoyance startled me because when she started out with young lady, I thought she was going to praise me. I thought she was going to be happy and pleased with what I was doing. But it became clear that she was upset, that she was annoyed. And so I was startled by her annoyance. And I almost a little higher than a whisper, I said to her, I'm reading. And she burst out like louder than she needed to be. I haven't taught the class to read yet. And the blush of my dark skin was imperceptible, but I was really embarrassed. And some of the other children kind of giggled nervously and they scattered. You shouldn't be lying about reading to your classmates, she said to me. She selected another book, Tip and Mitten, and she asked me to read it. And so I did, as requested. And she snatched the book from my hand and she said, anyone can memorize. And I wasn't completely sure about the word memorize, but I knew she was insulting me and her judgment was final. I could not read. Or at least she didn't believe it could be possible. And I wondered to myself, what am I doing wrong? Why doesn't she like me? I want her to like me. Later that month, she asked me to do a favor for her. And she gave me a handwritten note. And she said, can you take this to Mrs. Gould down the hall? And I loved Mrs. Gould. She was just like her name. She was deeply tanned. Okay, so maybe that's bronze, not gold. And she wore a lot of shiny jewelry and she smiled all of the time. I wish that she was my teacher. So I was glad to be asked to deliver something to her by Mrs. Viets. And I also was happy that I kind of thought, well, maybe Mrs. Viets is starting to like me a little, because don't the favorite kids, the pets, don't they, as they used to be called, don't they get to do favors for the teacher? Plus, that class was so boring. And so this was an opportunity, a rare one, to get out of there and take a walk. So I took the note and I stepped inch by inch down the other end to the other end of the hallway where Mrs. Gould's classroom was. And as I walked very slowly, I kind of toyed with the note and I unfolded it and then I closed it back up. And I know this was really wrong. I opened it again and I read it. And it read as follows. Roz, I just found out that Dina Brown is adopted. I'll tell you all about it at lunch, Dorothy. Her name was signed Dorothy. Reading that note made my cheeks hot. I knew about that word adopted because I had seen papers in mommy's underwear drawer that were wrapped in with a blue cover and tucked inside a clear folder, and they were technically adoption papers. I saw my name on those papers. I saw my name as it was when I was born, and then my new name that I was being given with these papers. And this was so that the happy couple and myself would all be a nice family and all have the same name. I folded the note back up and I continued down the hallway. And I handed it to Mrs. Gold with a smile, returning her smile, because remember, she was always smiling. And she gave me a lollipop. And this is the kind of person that she was. That's why I wish that she was my teacher. And I then slowly walked back down the hallway while I chewed on to eat the lollipop. When I got back to the classroom, I threw away quickly my stick and the little clear wrapper, and I walked straight over to the crafts table. Crafts? Well, that's a little bit of a stretch because we only had paper, fat broken crayons, and that paste, that white paste that comes in a bottle with a stick. No markers, no paints, no glitter, no macaronis, nothing to make a craft project out of, but it was called the craft table nonetheless. And I went over there to see my friends, Renee and Diane, and they were my best friends. Well, they were my only friends because I only knew them for weeks at this point. And I said to them, hey guys, Dina Brown is adopted. It's a secret though, you can't say anything to anyone. And they both seemed to know what adopted meant. And it was like we were secretly sharing and trying out a cuss word for the first time. And they said to me, who told you that? And I said, it's just a secret. We just can't tell anybody else. You can't say anything. You can't tell anyone. And let me just tell you quickly about Dina Brown. Dina Brown was beautiful. She was a beautiful olive-skinned girl with light brown ringlet type hair. And she had these huge dimples that she shared liberally, although she could be provoked to tears with equal measure. And so I had played with her in the schoolyard, like before school now and then. And she was a grade ahead of me, so I didn't really see her inside of school too often. But she was just really striking, and she didn't match the complexion of the other kids kind of in our school. I used to stare at her and wonder, A, why are you so pretty? B, where did you come from? And she had a younger brother he was the complexion of a chocolate chip. And so it didn't fit in my mind, but she was just very sweet. She was as sweet as she was beautiful. So later that day, and did I mention we all envied her hair? Because we did. Later that day, I saw her in the playground after school. And she was flashing her dimples, and I was sort of looking at her, and I was thinking about this new information that I had, the secret. What should I do about it? It's a secret. Should I say something? Should I not say something? I asked her if she was adopted. Blurted. Now there's a word, because it just came out of my face and I had no control. I didn't even feel like I could help it. And it wiped the smile clean off her face. She burst into tears and she sobbed. She openly sobbed so loudly that other kids were asking, what happened to her? What's wrong? And she was inconsolable. She was inconsolable, and it was my fault. The very next morning, when I got to school, Mrs. Viets dragged me. Okay, she grabbed my arm really hard and she took me to the principal's office. And she said, young lady, you're in very big trouble. Well, you know what? I had a name. I still have a name. And I don't recall Mrs. Viets ever calling me by my name. She and the principal wanted to know if I had told Dina that she was adopted. Her mother, they told me, was very upset, and she might even come down to the school later on, and that they definitely were going to give a call to the happy couple and tell on me. And so I was going to be in like huge trouble. If I didn't think I was, then now I know. And so I fidgeted and I sort of twisted the hem on my dress. Shit. I just wish that I could just be in North Carolina, be back on the farm. And then I wished my mom was there. I don't know if she would understand, but I just wish that she was there. And at first I just looked at them in silence and they kept asking questions. Well, how did you get this information? Did you hear someone talking about it? Who was it that you overheard? And finally they surmised that I couldn't possibly have read it anywhere because I couldn't read. Remember? Somehow, the way they were speaking to me, it was like nails on a blackboard. I just wanted to get out of there. And I didn't feel afraid and I didn't feel tearful. And I felt terrible about Dina. How bad I felt, I don't think that word has been invented yet. It's been created yet. It just was profound that, that the damage that I felt that I had done to her and to her, just hurt her feelings. But they weren't asking me anything about that. They weren't asking me what happened. Did you say it? What happened? Where were you? They were concerned about where I got the information. And so I became defiant. And I told the principal, without making eye contact with you-know-who, I read a note that she had given me to deliver to Mrs. Gold. And I repeated the contents of the note. And I had read the note, and that's how 7.5-year-old Dina Brown found out that she was adopted late in the Connecticut summer, after school, on the playground, from a schoolmate, from me. But for me, in that moment, in my 6.5-year-old mind, the unspoken question that really mattered to me was, Mrs. Viets, do you believe I can read now? Thank you.
What a treat. Oh my gosh, we have had two amazing stories tonight. You just took us on a journey that put me back into first grade. I mean, from the description of the crayons and the thing of paste to I was just in it with you. So in it with you. And this, just feeling this little, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 6-year-old, wanting to be seen by this teacher. So thank you. That was so rich, and so beautifully told.
Thank you.
I don't even know where to begin. I was so cheering for this little girl to be seen by her teacher and recognized in her fullness, and that you're telling this story on International Women's Day as a As a woman now, I couldn't help but think about all the little girls that struggle to be seen and valued and believed, right, for who they are and what they bring. And so thank you for that. That was very, very timely. So these teachers, did you ever see them again after elementary school, or?
I went to that school for one more year, and that teacher was not there. Mrs. Gold was there, but Mrs. Vietz, I maybe she retired. I don't know what happened to her. She wasn't there, and I was glad not to see her. And
I sort of hope she picked a new career.
This was a short, well, yeah, and she was on the end of that career. This was just a short piece, of the story, but subsequently, the ramifications of that incident were longer lasting, because on the playground I was shunned. Kids, it got around very quickly that I was the one who told her that she was adopted, and it just, every once in a while, because this is a small town, it would pop up again, that's what had happened. So I have changed the names, but it's a true story, and anyone who was around would recognize what happened. So it was painful. I still hurt, that people held a 6 and almost 7-year-old responsible for. There was this on so many levels. I couldn't get the teacher to like me, and then I committed this sin, this grand sin that really should have been handled by adults. They should have been responsible for. And then just the way in which I was approached. I didn't know how to get out of that room except to say what had happened, and then tell on the teacher, who I then had to be a student of for the rest of the school year.
Right, and here's a 6-year-old carrying the burden of what was really adult gossip. Adults inappropriately gossiping, right? I felt for you, as you said. I wished my mom, right, that your mom were there when you were in that office. Did you share the story with your mom? Did she know what happened, or?
I did not share as a child the story with her, but I was under the impression that the teachers had spoken to her, as they promised they would, and she didn't. She never reprimanded me or chastised me about it, but she also didn't ask, are you okay? How do you feel? Being dragged in a room with these adults and accused of something, which I had done, but still.
Yeah.
Without.
Does that have anything to do with why you changed schools, or was that a totally other? No,
it was. The reason I changed schools was because my parents felt like I was bored all the time. Like the school couldn't keep up with with my learning pace. Like I went to school reading already, and the other kids weren't reading, things like that. And so they said, this is just, she's gonna get stifled. We have to get her out of here. And so they put me in private school.
Right. We are getting some comments from Christopher Mandeville. What a great story. Such wonderful telling. Grateful for your sharing. And Amy Joy, loved the description of your teacher. Asked, how did the experience impact how you felt about school going forward?
It took me a good while. I was very intimidated about school going forward. And it wasn't until I got a teacher who was a Black woman, actually, who realized how bright I was and just sort of did everything she could to kind of promote that and lift me up. And then I became a little less fearful of teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So we could go on with. There's so much richness here. We could go on and on. Kev works in a school district, does a lot around teacher recruitment and minority teacher recruitment, and I'm just thinking about how impactful teachers are on young people, and when that impact is life-giving and inspiring, that's so beautiful. But when it is the reverse, how crushing it can be. And you're just really raising that for me.
Excuse me, not believing as a child of color, not being believed and not being encouraged or supported. It just really, it wasn't good. And I wanted to make sure when I had my own children that they weren't going to have that kind of an experience, because that wasn't, you're kind of learning in spite of people instead of because of them.
Because of people.
And we do have that issue of not being listened to, not being heard. So, it starts young, and it can get young also.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being a return teller, for helping us demonstrate to our audience that this is a great experience, so much so that you might come back and do it again. And our seat remains open for you. It remains open for David at any point. We thank you so much. And folks, this is what Storytellers New Haven is all about. This is exactly what we do. We find amazing members of our community, and you can have told story before, or it can be your first time. It can be a story you've practiced and worked on, or it can be the first telling of something that's just the germ, the beginning of a story. All of that is welcome, because this is not about the experience or skill in storytelling. This is about how you share some aspect of yourself with others, so that we can see in each other aspects of ourselves where we can appreciate the differences between us and build together a stronger community. So with that, I think I'm done. Kev, any closing words?
Yeah, no, I was just amazed at that. And I just had all of these questions. So thank you for sharing that story. That was great. Just want to thank everybody for coming out. And again, like every year, every month, I share my amazement that people still continue to come out and support it, and we greatly appreciate it. I know this was Piyar's story, so I didn't want to interrupt and tell her that I was probably 12 when I spread a rumor about someone being adopted. I overheard someone's parents saying that people think that the girl's adopted, and I just ran out and told everyone that she was adopted. It didn't end well for me, but
well, save that. We invite you to tell it in a future month. We want to know all about that one as well.
Yeah.
Our next gathering is April 12th. We will be back here on our YouTube channel, getting closer and closer to the time we can be in person. But until then, please join us as we do stream live on YouTube. Go visit our channel and see the other stories, the stories you've missed, or revisit these wonderful stories tonight. Thank you to Kevin Ewing, our backstage technical support, as always. And with that, we'll see you next month. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah. Elm City, what up? Look, I'm from a city that's half pretty and half gritty. Ain't too many cities rocking with the Elm City, home of the Blazers. Those were the days when I played all these fast breaks. We don't need plays. We play on Sundays like we don't need praise. We pressing our game like we don't need bricks. Look, no debate, best team in the state. We float like the Lakers back in '88. I learned to play Crazy Yates in the city that raised the kid that wanna be big. Like I wanna be big. I really hate the way raps